The United Nations Commissions on Human Rights in South Sudan report has found that serious human rights and international humanitarian law violations have been committed in the country. The violations include targeting civilian populations and individual civilians on the basis of their ethnic identity and perceived political affiliations by means of killings, abductions, rape and sexual violence, as well as destruction of villages. The ongoing humanitarian crisis has resulted in massive displacement of the civilian population of South Sudan. To talk to us more about the atrocities being committed in South Sudan, we joined now in our studios by Emmaculate Asige Liaga, South Sudan expert from the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship, University of Pretoria. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much indeed. As I said on my introduction, that atrocities such as conflict-related sexual violence is very much endemic. Rape, mutilations of sexual organs and other forms of sexual violence really seems to be taking place. Why is it taking so long for a South Sudan government to do something?
Well, the South Sudanese government is taking too long because it doesn't want to hold the responsibility of its people. As a state, you're supposed to protect the well-being of your people, and they're busy fighting the war because the war is between the South Sudanese government and the opposition, which is led by the Riek Machar. So the government is busy fighting, and it's not taking care of the people. At the same time, the AU, the UN, and other international organizations are also not holding the government responsible enough. They're not putting down measures which can be punitive to the government.
But why are they not doing anything about the situation?
So the situation is very complicated. It's not as easy as it sounds. I'll start from the beginning. In 2013, the Sudanese government was split into two, which was the SPLM, which is the South Sudanese People Liberation Movement, which is it has an army fold into it, which is the South Sudanese People Liberation Army, which split into two, the in government and in the opposition. So these two are fighting each other. The government is paramount to the ongoing fighting. So its attention is taken into the fighting. So themselves want to win. So they cannot divert their attention into protecting of the civilians. And they're using the civilians as a shield to attack the opposition and to win the war. So in essence, the government is actually attacking the civilians as a means of the conflict.
Because it certainly looks like the right to life is under threat. Will this sort of turn into a possible genocide, maybe? Actually,
there are reports already that's turning into genocide. If you see the presidential side or the government side is the Dinkas and the opposition is the Nuers generally, the conflict is not necessarily split clearly into these lines, but to a big extent it's split like that. And they're fighting each other. So there are reports of the government killing the Nuers, and in the opposition side, the Nuers killing the government supporters, even if they're not supporters, this anyone who comes from those tribal lines. And we've seen the UN has reported massive killings from both sides, and both sides are being they're held equally responsible. But the international community as well does not. For example, the AU only has almost like suggestive measures. It's not like punitive. So it's finding it very hard to hold the government responsible. For example, if you see the justice system, which the AU is supposed to have the South Sudanese government establish to hold South Sudanese officials responsible for the mass killings. This was agreed in 2015. Up to now, there's no such action, organization to hold these leaders responsible. So the situation is very slow and developments are very slow, but civilians are continuing to die. You mentioned sexual violence as well is very rampant.
It is quite a very complicated situation, I must say. But world leaders and perhaps organizations such as your African Union, are they really taking notice of what is happening and acting on this crisis, or are they just sitting back as well?
The international community has been very active in this conflict. For example, even before the conflict in 2013, it was there since the before 2005, which is the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. Before that, the international community was present. After that, it kept its presence so that it could help the South Sudanese government transition. But some of the very important aspects of South Sudanese, for example, governance, was hugely overlooked. Some of the internal conflict was also overlooked because the attention was mostly between Sudan and South Sudan and not within Sudan itself. But currently, the international system is there. IGAD is there, which is the Regional East African Movement. Is there TRECA, which is the United States, United Kingdom, and Norway is also present, and they're doing all the best they can. The United Nations is also there. So they are helping bring South Sudan together. But the majority or the big part of the peace is going to be found from the Sudanese government, which is hugely uncooperative.
Yeah, but what's the state of affairs there in terms of children? Are they going to school? Because we're reporting now on the sexual and gender-based violence that's also featuring predominantly.
So the sexual and gender-based violence has been used as a weapon both in the government and the opposition side. There is no side which is escaping from this accusation. Children are also being abducted by both sides as well to fight in the as child soldiers, which is something by now which should have been abolished by now. So there are areas where it's a little bit peaceful, and also it's also temporal. Some months are rather peaceful than others. So there's no consistency. I cannot say children are going to school, but hugely a lot of children are not going. There's also a campaign which is give our children pens and not guns. So if you look at the situation holistically, children are not being taken care of. There's sexual violence, like you mentioned, and there is no education which is going, especially for girls who are hugely vulnerable in the situation.
Okay, we have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for coming through. We'll be keeping a very close eye on the situation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much to Emmaculate Asige Liaga, South Sudan expert from the Center for the Advancement of Scholarship from the University of Pretoria, talking to us about the situation in South Sudan.